Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and welcome to the Oracle. Coming to you from our safe house, a bunker deep beneath the Louvre Museum in Paris. We predict the news before it happens. 2 weeks ago, we predicted that Abu Dhabi would come to the rescue of Dubai. This week, Abu Dhabi bought $10 billion worth of bonds from Dubai. Yabba dabba Dubai. You've seen the Flintstones. Have you seen the Flintstones? We're going to get to you in a second. Yeah. To help us see into the future this week, in the studio, economist Alfredo Valladao, professor of international relations at Science Po and founder of the Economic and Geopolitical Yearbook, The State of the World. Also joining us via satellite from Singapore is legendary, bow-tie-wearing Jim Rogers, ladies and gentlemen, the legend. In the second half, we'll be joined by Michael Hudson to talk about the Chicago Tea Party that's brewing and that scoundrel of YouTube, Rick the Scoundrel Santelli. Now, Stacy, we're going to be talking right now about this whole Eastern European banking meltdown, Shmagaga, Shfinegi. There's a whole meltdown in the Eastern Europe. It's invading the Western Europe. There's like a financial tornado brewing. It's a colossal cluster. Beep. Tell us the headlines on this. Tell us more, Stacey.
Latvia's coalition government quits amid economic crisis. This is the second government to fall after Iceland since the financial crisis began. The citizens of Latvia stormed the central bank and its parliament after the government received a $12 billion bailout from the IMF, and still the economy is clinically dead, they say. The next headline from the Telegraph: if Eastern Europe falls, the world is next. I've got a little film of this. Here's Eastern Europe. All their loans are heading west. 1.5 trillion is owed, and it doesn't look likely that they will pay it back.
That's a frickin' catastrophe. Let me get Jim Rogers in on this immediately. Currency speculator and investor extraordinaire. Jim, this whole Eastern Europe fandango, this $1 trillion plus debt deflation, whatever you want to call it, is it really going to swamp the Western banks? What's your take? What?
It's certainly going to swamp quite a lot of European banks, especially because many European banks went over there and sold all sorts of undercut mortgages to unassuming and unsophisticated Central Europeans, and now they're going to pay the price. You think Latvia is the only place, and Iceland the only places that are going to have changes of governments. I'm sorry to tell you, there are going to be a lot of changes of government. There are going to be civil unrest in many countries in the world in the next couple of years.
Now, the mortgages that were taken out in that area, for the general audience, maybe you can just touch upon the fact that they were taken out in a different currency, and therefore there's a huge whipsaw effect. Can you just cover that a little bit?
Yes, what they did, they took out loans, mortgages, say, in Japanese yen because they only had to pay 1% interest rate for their mortgage, and all the Central Europeans thought this was wonderful, but nobody explained to them that if the value of the yen goes up, you're going to have to pay much, much, much higher, and many of those mortgage payments are now up 40 or 50% because the local Central European currencies have collapsed. Therefore, all of the poor mortgage holders are now essentially bankrupt.
I see that the death of the financial markets is a little premature. We've been always saying that the financial markets will die. Every time you have a big crisis, you have irrational exuberance, whatever, and then people say it's going to die. I don't think it's going to die because countries don't die. Producers don't die.
Died.
No, didn't die. The Lafayette changed government, but the country in itself don't die. So people will still be working, people will still be consuming, people will still be producing, and you have to have credit investment to do that. So you will not have this big party that we had all these years with the American credit card.
Austrian finance minister recently said that Austria alone has loaned 230 billion euros to Eastern Europe. That is equal to 70% of Austria's GDP. Your reaction?
Well, I agree with him. It's a fact. Many of the Austrian banks are in serious trouble now. They rushed into Central Europe. We now know the results. I mean, you don't have to ask me my reaction. They've got 70% of their loans involved with Central Europe, and Central Europe is turning into a disaster.
But how can a country like Austria have exposure of 70% of their GDP to just one region of the world, Eastern Europe? who's responsible for that?
Well, the individuals at the banks are responsible for that. They all got swept away with what a good idea was. Just like the investment banks in America all got swept away with the idea that, securitizing credit was a wonderful thing. They did it with mortgages and car loans and student loans. I mean, it's just got the madness swept around through everybody. Same thing happened in Europe. Everybody gets on the same boat. They think it's all wonderful. They're taking big fees out. And suddenly somebody says, hey, wait a minute, this has got to stop. And it does stop. And then you have to pay the price. And that's what I'm suggesting. The only way we're going to get out of this is to take our pain for a year or two or three, and then maybe we can start over. We'll know who's sound. Throughout history, banks and investment banks have been going bankrupt, Stacy. Let them go bankrupt. There are competent people in the world who saw this coming, who minded their manners, who stayed solvent, and have been waiting for the opportunity to now expand market share. The governments are taking their assets and giving them to the people who failed and saying, now you can compete with the competent people. I mean, this is horrible, horrible economics, and it's terrible morality.
It's a little bit difficult to say to the people who are going to lose their jobs and be on the streets that let them go bankrupt. I think in the whole system, you have only two alternatives. When you have limited resources and a lot of people, and a lot of poor people, there's only two things you can do. You can say the economic growth has to be balanced with the resources. So you take credit and you regulate it, you control it, and you have a very small growth, and you say to the people, everything will go fine, but only for your grandchildren. The other way is to say, let's put credit on the street, hedge funds, securities, whatever you want. You have a very strong growth. You have a lot of people getting out of misery, and then the things crash.
Alfredo is talking about poor people suffering. Of course they are. But the rich people, I'm suggesting, Alfredo, you let the rich people go bankrupt. I'm saying this is welfare for the rich, what the governments are doing. They're doing this for the banking community. They're not doing this for farmers in Nebraska. They're bailing out their friends. Let them go bankrupt.
It looks like Germany is probably the only sound economy in all of Europe, and they've been warning for years about these speculators. Do you think they should bail out Austria and Italy and Latvia and Ukraine and Hungary? And
Stacey, I said before, I don't think you should bail out anybody. The world doesn't have enough money to bail out the system right now. The Swiss recently bailed out UBS. The Swiss banks are bigger than the Swiss government. You're going to see governments collapsing and failing if they try to bail out everybody in the world. There's not enough money in most governments to do this. By the way, the money is in Asia now. The money is certainly not in the West anymore. Maybe the Asians will ride to the rescue of the West, but I cannot conceive that they would. They got to rescue themselves.
It's time now for the Oracle to predict what will happen as the new casino commie capital states in Eastern Europe go absolutely, unequivocally bust. Well, the Oracle says, number one, the IMF prints new global currency as 42 nations apply for emergency loans. A global currency? I think I read about this on the internet. A new world order, the Bilderberg Group, the Illuminati. It's all coming true? Another prediction. Good Europe, bad Europe. Created to isolate toxic debtor nations from Germany. Good Europe, bad Europe, formerly old Europe, new Europe? Who needs a blitzkrieg when various parts of Europe like Czechoslovakia and Poland are destroying themselves chasing the American dream of bank-enabled indentured servitude? Okay, Jim Rogers, so what do you think of those predictions?
Well, I don't think the IMF is going to issue a new currency. What the IMF is going to probably do is sell all their gold and then pass it out to as many people as they can, but then that'll be the end of the IMF because the IMF will not survive this either. And thank goodness, Max, the IMF has been nothing but a disaster for the past 50 years. The first 10 years or so after the Second World War, they did some good things, but they haven't paid attention to their mandate for 60 years. All they do is make sure their bureaucrats have good jobs and good pensions and good salaries. We're better off without the IMF, and we soon will be better off without the IMF.
Jim, are your pockets full of gold coins today?
I actually do have some gold coins. I don't know how you knew that. I wish you wouldn't spread it around.
You speak like an undertaker, Jim. You're killing everybody, the IMF, the Fed, everything.
Jim, thank you very much for being on the show. As you know, in Paris, there's a traditional way of dealing with these malcontents. And it involves something a little bit more strenuous than a simple congressional inquiry, if you get my drift. I see you nodding. Yes. Yes. Well, that's it for the first half of the show. Join us after the break. We'll be making predictions about the bailout losers and the future of Swiss banking.